Morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We will begin with chapter 1, verse 20. Chapter 1, verse 20. So now we begin going through the numbers of the tribes. Vayuvne Ruvain Bechor Yisrael. And there were of the tribe of Ruvain. Ruvain, of course, the firstborn of Yisrael. He was Yaakov's firstborn son. And we go through what the numbers are. It's interesting that he's referred to here as the firstborn. Sort of a little bit like, was that either here or there? Why is that important for me to know? And if it is important for me to know, I can just look back in the story and find out which one was born first. So an interesting sforno over here, sforno on Pasuk Chaf, Bechor Yisrael, Shalom Nafa Mima'alaso B'dina Shamayim Mibnei Tshuvaso. There's a famous idea that Ruvain committed a grave sin. Ruvain switched around his father's beds. I mean, it's a little bit unclear when you look at the Psukim. The Medrash understands that he switched around his father's beds. It was considered to be a disrespectful act. He did tshuva. He repented. And the Torah is conveying to us here that since he repented, in God's eyes, he's still the firstborn of Israel. There's a similar point. Late in Sefer Bereshis, it refers to the sons of Yaakov, and it emphasizes that the Bechor is Ruvain. That's another way of the Torah reminding us that the fact that he repented, he's still seen as prominent in God's eyes. Ruvain doesn't enjoy any of the trappings of being the firstborn. In fact, who really enjoys the trappings of being the firstborn? Yosef. Because the idea of the firstborn more than anything else is to get a double portion of the inheritance. And Yosef is represented by two tribes. Yosef is the oldest of Rachel, who was the more desired wife of Yaakov, but that's normally not how the birthright goes. Normally the birthright is based on the father's oldest child. So Reuven lost his right. It's understood as lost his right based on his sin. But even though he lost his right, the Torah is still emphasizing here that God still looks at him with prominence, which is an interesting thing to think about. Okay, moving ahead, verse 45. Verse 45. So we've gotten through all of the numbers of the tribes. I know you were hoping I was going to go through the numbers of each tribe. You're going to have to wait for Shabbos to get that, but okay, can't get it all. But verse 45, Vayub kol pekudei bnei Yisrael v'esavu sam, and all of the numbers of all of the Jewish people, Ben Esrim Sharav V'Mala, Kayot Seitzav of Yisrael, from the males from 20 and up, and it gives the total number. Why is that even important? They were told to count by tribe, and now we give the sum total. So there's an interesting Ramban over here. Ramban in Pasuk Mem Hey, Vayub kol pekudei bnei Yisrael v'esavu sam, Hutzrach hakasuv lahagid mispar haklal la'achar shehigid hapratim. The Torah wants to indicate the total number after it indicated the number per tribe. Ki nitztav Moshe v'Aaron sheyedu mispar mifgad ha'am, because the instruction to Moshe and Aaron is that they're supposed to know the entire numbers of the nation. V'yedu mispar kol shevet v'shevet. They should know both. They should know the totality of the nation, and they should know tribe by tribe. Even though the pasuk didn't explicitly tell them so, but the fact that the Torah tells us what the total numbers were is Hashem's way of indicating that this was also part of what he wanted. When a king would count his nation, it would be normal to count them as segments, perhaps, but certainly to get the total numbers. Now the Ramban goes further. I don't understand why God would want a total number for the Jewish people. Why would God even make this instruction? I get why we need to understand how many are in each tribe, because we're about to set up the configuration of how the tribes are to camp. And it's important to know when you're setting up who's going to go where. You sort of need to know how much tent space there is, in which place. You need to know how big each tribe is. It's not enough to know how many total people you have. You need to know tribe by tribe if you want them to camp with their tribes. That makes sense to us. That's evident. But why does it matter what the total number is of the Jewish people? Ramban says, maybe the point of emphasizing the total number is to convey to the Jewish people the tremendous kindness that God has brought upon them. They went down as 70 to Egypt. And now there's so much, the total number at this juncture of males over the age of 20 is 630,550. It's pretty good over 70. Ramban says in general, after there's some type of plague that befalls the Jewish people in the desert, God counts them again. To convey to the people, to convey to Klal Yisrael that God is interested in them, and that specifically when they have some kind of calamity befall them, God certainly wants to know how many there are. Obviously, God knows how many there are, but this is God's way of conveying His interest in them. And this is the idea. Rashi says it earlier in this week's parsha, that His counting of them is an expression of His abundant affection for them. Va'od. Now, the Ramban is, so up until now, we've been saying nice ideas about the total numbers. It's to convey, wow, look how far the Jewish people have come, thanks to God's goodness for them. It's to convey God's interest in them in different places, particularly when there's been some kind of calamity. Now the Ramban goes in a different direction of why it's valuable to count them in general. A person who comes before the greatest of all the prophets, Moshe Rabbeinu, and not only the greatest of all the prophets, but his brother, the Holy One of God, Aaron HaKohen, V'unoda aleim b'shmo, and he's known to the people by name. Yelo b'davar hazeh schus v'chaim. What a merit, what an invigorating idea it is that just a random person in Klal Yisrael comes before them and he tells his name to Moshe and Aaron. Ki ba b'sod ha'am u'v'chsab b'nei Yisrael. Forgive me for going off, but I just saw it yesterday. I was watching an interview of Sivan Rahav Meir, this very, very well-known news reporter in Israel. Very interesting person. So she quoted something that she once heard from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, Zichrono Livracha, and she said, and he posed the question, do you know what's the most important question, what's the most prominent question that people ask me? You know, a person like Rabbi Sachs, people ask him all kinds of stuff. So he says the most compelling question that people ask him is when they see him, they ask if he remembers them. You know, in other words, a well-known person, I thought it was such an interesting insight. Well-known person travels around all over the place. A person comes up to them and says, hi, remember me? I once asked you some really interesting question on some cruise or something, whatever it is. That's the most compelling question that he gets. Do you remember me? So just to think about that in this context, these people come before Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron HaKohen, and they refer to him by name. Or he introduces himself by name to them. And there's an idea of the merits of the masses in these numbers. There's a merit for everyone in the numbers that they're counted before Moshe and Aaron. Because Moshe and Aaron look benevolently upon them. The great Moshe and Aaron asked that Hashem should have mercy on this person. Hashem Elokei Avosechem Yosef Aleichem V'lo Yamid Misparchem. Moshe gives a bracha to Klal Yisrael as a whole, that God should only add to you and should not take away from your numbers. And by the way, when they come and they give the half shekel, that also is a mitzvah. That's a merit for them. So they're part of this great group. They get to present themselves to these great, great tzaddikim. And then all the brachos that come upon Klal Yisrael, they do a mitzvah when they come forward because they give a half shekel. And then all the brachos on Klal Yisrael fall on this person as well. So many wonderful things in the counting. Bamidbar Sinai Rabba Reisi came from Mispar Shemos the Gugalosam. Amalo HaKadosh Baruch Hu Nosam the Kavod Gedula the Chol Echad ve'Echad. So Hashem says that he wants to count them in prominence for each and every one. Lote omer l'rosh hamishpacha kama mishpachtach kama banim lach. Don't just go up to the head of the family and say, "Nu, how many are your family? How many kids do you have?" El kulam you over in lefanecha. Let each person go before you, each male over the age of 20, be'ema v'chavod, with a sense of reverence, a sense of honor, atamonosam, and you'll count them. Hadahu d'chsev. This is what's meant in the pasuk. Mispar shemos ben Hashem shonrav amal uglosa. That's what it means, says the Medrash. That by the head, you count them in that way. So we've spoken about this is God's way of expressing his affection for the Jewish people. We've spoken about that a person is counting themselves in, standing for Moshe and Aaron, and they're being shown how much they count. Could be one more thing, that this is common when a monarchy, when a king is going to war. If things would have gone smoothly with the spies, it wouldn't have been so long until they were going into the land of Israel to conquer the land of Israel. In just a couple parshios, Moshe Rabbeinu says, we are now traveling to the place that God said. The Ramban says this is a very practical thing. They need to know, how many soldiers do we have? And similarly, all the numbers of the tribes. Torah lo sismoch al hanes sheyirdof echad elef. We're not supposed to rely on miracles, even though there are these brachos. That one Jew should chase 1,000 enemies. That's great, but there has to be a military plan, and so we need to know the numbers. Zetam kol yotzeitzav Israel. That could be what's meant. All the people who go out to the legions in Israel. So the Ramban, if you remember earlier in the week, we said had a whole pshat that it just means all the people who gathered. That might be the pshat, but it might be very much a military preparation for going into Israel. Another relevance to these numbers is because the land is going to be divvied among the tribes. And so in order to divvy the land among the tribes, that's not going to happen yet, but the procedure is going to be discussed. In order to divvy the land among the tribes, you need to know how many people there are in each tribe. So these are all interesting ideas. We discussed this forno about Reuven still retaining his status as Bechor, and we discussed the Ramban further comments on all these concepts of counting.